Hi, and welcome to the Improvisors podcast. I'm Kevin Janes. This is my co-host, Neil Thomas.
Thank you, Kevin. Here on the Improvisers podcast, we talk with performers about their histories, their practices, their conceptualizations around their practices, and their projects and enthusiasm. Who are we talking with today, Kevin?
Today, Neil, we've got such a wonderful opportunity to chat to Alice HUI-SHENG CHANG from Taiwan.
We talked with Alice about the impact upon her of discovering her performative voice. We talked of her wide-ranging collaborations and the situation of the indigenous peoples of Taiwan.
Alice also describes herself as a conceptual artist using vocalized sound. She spoke about Tingshaw, a community venue that her and her partner Nigel run in Taiwan with a particular focus on listening, arts, and discursive education. Alice also spoke of her most recent project, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland.
I hope you enjoy this conversation with Alice as much as we did.
Yes, it was wonderful. Let's go.
Hi and welcome all the way from Taiwan. Thank you so much for taking the time with Kevin and I to talk about yourself and your work and Taiwan and your art center. Maybe we'll start with you, your history and your relationship with the arts.
Hi, I'm Alice. So Alice is not my real name. My Chinese name, my last name is Zhang, which we put it first, and then first name we put last, which is Hui-Sheng, so it's Zhang Hui-Sheng. And yeah, starting with me, I actually went to Melbourne when I was 17, when I finished high school. And I wanted to study arts, but I didn't know what kind of area I could do, because I didn't have any training of anything. I didn't have training in music or drawings or any kind of skillful background. So I started with sort of doing more general study when I got to Australia, and actually found a course called Media Arts, and then I started Media Arts. And through that, of course, there's a sound stream, and in that I started exploring voice in media. So I started making videos and making different recorded work with my voice. And then I got asked by other people saying, do you want to play with us? Do you want to, come into the studio to play with us? And I didn't know what it means, but I guess that's the beginning of improvisation. So the first two classmates I improv with were Anfia Caddy, who was on cello, and she was on sort of prepared cello, and another prepared guitar classmate, Michael Pryor, and they're both very active in different areas at the moment, and wonderful artists at the moment as well. And also when I got into doing that in the studio, I started to think about what else can how else can I learn improvisation? And so I started looking around and found El Wonder, and I sort of went to El Wonder in that same year when I was first year in uni. And just sort of yeah, dropping into various classes and meeting different people and going to different performances. And of course, me sort of using voice, using sound, or yeah, sort of a little bit different from a lot of the other sort of theater or mover background people. So starting to find how I can work with people, I guess coming back to what's common between us, and finding, of course, there's a body. And because most people don't use a lot of voice, maybe there was more dancers than theater people, maybe. So yeah, most people don't use their voice. So yeah, we've sort of probably what's more in common is our body and the space. So I really started to use space and use bodies in space, and so continued to develop from there. So I perform often with moving around the space or going into the audience and kind of sitting in the audience seats, or going behind or outside of the theater, playing with different acoustic, different projections, different intimacy with audience, and then continued to develop playing with multiple bodies. So I also do bigger ensemble performers where I trained, or I run workshops for 10 to 20 people who has no vocal training. And so I've done lots of groups where we do maybe 2 to 3 workshops, and I develop a simple score game, and we activate a large architectural space. So I often work with acoustic and space and how these bodies occupy the space.
Alice, welcome. I'm so excited, as Neil said before, to have an opportunity to chat to you. And I think you have a very particular way of working with vocalized sound, and as you've just mentioned, of working collaboratively with others, and working in situ in spaces, around spaces, and outside of spaces. I'm aware, since moving back to Taiwan, that you have developed your own center there called Tingshaw. Before we started this recording, you gave us a little bit of a walk around and a look at. I'm wondering if you'd take this opportunity now to speak about that center that you developed, a little bit about that, and what you're currently offering there, and where your own practice is maybe at the moment.
So I moved back to Taiwan for 2 periods of time. Firstly was 2007 and 8. So I stayed for 2 years, and that was sort of post the first masters, and really to reconnect with the sound scene here, and kind of also trying to find what are the artists in Taiwan thinking compared to what I'm thinking. Do we have something that match? And at that time, I struggled to find improvisers. And I'm from sort of central Taiwan. And so I started to tour to multiple cities and organize different gigs and try to meet different musicians in different cities, and seeing if anyone want to try improvisation together. And also at that time, I thought about how I can kind of connect myself back in a way. So I started to explore traditional music here, which is called Nanguan, one of the stream of very beautiful meditative music with extreme control singing, and enjoyed a lot of also indigenous music and different indigenous rituals, kind of following to some of the rituals. And so really sort of finding how the voice from my island could be kind of feedback to my, at that time, my improvisation was very based on sound art tradition, which is like, you know, I often sound like a synthesizer or electronic as a vocalist. So for me, kind of opening that out to very traditional opera or much more open indigenous style singing, it's very, in a way, yeah, freeing. So I started to kind of sing in a way, which I didn't used to in Melbourne. And so yeah, this is probably a long journey. Anyway, I went back to Australia. I went to Europe for another year, and then went back to Australia and studied a MIECAT. And then post that, moved back to Taiwan again in 2016. So it's been about 9 years. And I started to think and started to see a lot more improvisers, even though it's still very small scene, and thinking about how I position myself in this art scene, in a border art scene, in a way, how we could contribute in terms of our network when we toured as experimental musician, or in terms of like bringing in different influences, in terms of also our production skills. So we built Ting Shuo, which means hear and say, Ting and Shuo, but together as a word means hearsay, means kind of rumors or heard of someone said something. So we started to really produce and curate a large number of work in the last 8 years, mainly a lot of Taiwanese artists, as well as hosting international travelers. And so hopefully, and we have seen the scene really grown in the last 15 years. So Taiwan's history has different chunks of time, because we had martial law until really late, until 89, 91, our martial law just slowly released. And so pre-martial law, everything was pirated. So pre-martial law was like a big underground of influences, but nothing was legit. And then post-martial law, a lot of artists became kind of more performance artists, very political style work, much more statement and action based. And then in our generation, we don't have that urge anymore. So it's sort of like also taking in, I mean, Taiwan, maybe compared to Australia, Taiwan's a place where we taking a lot of international influences, because there's constant travelers and performers from really all over Asia, from all over Western countries, constantly, really. So all of these sort of influences really sort of impact the art scene. Of course, people also start to collaborate with international productions. Yeah, like a lot of the sound artists here, kind of pretty much every month, they have an improvisation performance with different performers from around the world. So it's a very, very lucky position in a way. Most people do get get this broad inference. Yeah, so I guess I mean, I also do a lot of translation, and I help international artists to run events in our space. So we translate everything, and in that way, when we say ting and sure, listen and hear and say, for me, it's more about what we're doing now is more about how do we talk about sound, or how do we talk about experimental music, how do we and this is something that I experienced in 2007 and 8 is usually we tour around, and post-performance people come up and they kind of like are really interested, but they really have no language and no idea of how to talk to performer or what they just experienced. They sort of can't quite unpack because it's really the first experience. And there's also that as well. There's also that curiosity and excitement for me and for my partner Nigel. Like we feel there's an energy, and for a lot of traveling artists, there's sort of an energy performing for first-time performer. So here in our art space, we really try to bridge that language. So post-performers talking to different audiences or during workshop to put things into words, to put especially not about academic chats, not about commenting on how that music was made, but more what is your personal experience. And of course, especially experimental music, where a lot of people do have very imaginative thoughts or images, or people even see things, or people connect to memories, connect to emotions. And those are really beautiful things to feed back to the artist, rather than, I guess, something more critical. Yeah. So we try to bridge that in a way. So I'm in a house. This is the residency artist room. In a way, the downstairs is our living room, so our venue, and we treat all the audience and all the artists as house guests, and we try to have them really kind of have a comfortable conversation, but also an intimate one, have a really personal exchange in the space.
Book us in. I'd like to, an invitation. I'm curious to know what you think improvisation is for you. Unpack a little the difference between improvising or not improvising when you're performing.
I guess I'm not trained in music or theater, so I 100% performing improvisation. But I do work with theater pieces where I tour. So I guess some of those pieces, maybe I know, okay, at this part, I use a particular kind of voice. But every time it's different. And also because I don't do singing scales, or I don't do notes. So every time it's different. So probably only have structures. The most structure I would have is structures of a particular kind of voice, or maybe more like a particular kind of mood or image or scene or relationship we're trying to create in this part. And so for the pieces I tour, those are the most non-impro thing, whereas I still see them as impro, and yeah, I guess I did study art therapy, and for me before that as well, when I was doing improvisation, it's mostly about staying present for me, mostly about how to really be in that particular moment and not regretting what just happened, or not thinking about how I got here, and not imagining I can control the future. So just staying in that presence, and that states, in a way, I would describe it sort of like, it's not an inward thing, but it's more like a complete open sense to the outer environment. So it's a very so maybe firstly I would be tuning into the acoustic. So what kind of building material? There's glass here, there's concrete here, there's a bit of wood there. What kind of material is structuring my acoustic? What are the sound outside? And how far are they? What direction? What are the sound inside? The different fans, the noises. And then, of course, the other performers, if I'm performing with other people. And then the audiences as well. So I guess the audiences don't necessarily have so much sound, although none of them are completely silent. But sort of the audience for me is maybe more tuning into their atmosphere or energy or expectation, or yeah, like I say, a lot of also a lot of curiosity. And when the audience have curiosity, they have a certain mirroring to the performer. So they're sort of like tuning in to me. So the more concentrated I am to this tuning in, the more they are also tuning in. So in a way, I think, experimental music often is a very lucky space where people do get to experience this very precious concentration, where everyone is completely not always calm, but in a way like settled, and tuning in to what's about to happen. And maybe this is the beginning of it. And then, things start to unfold, things start to interact with other performers. And I often think about, how do I work with my non-habitual being in a way? So during the performance, maybe I hear a sound, or I sort of, have different inspiration that comes, and I can feel, okay, there's this voice about to come out, and I'll be like, hold on, hold it. So I often like try to hold the habitual or the urges, and try to think about, maybe not so much think, but try to call upon what else is there. So yeah, often I guess I'm trying to surprise myself, as well as the more kind of non-habitual being I am in, the more I'm not rolling into a non-present state, I guess, for me. So to stay present is sort of this very slightly alert or slightly awake sort of situation. So I'm not, in a way, yeah, it's not just sort of going into unconsciousness and letting that kind of take its course either, but it's sort of like in between. It's sort of like traveling really in between, but also really feeling connected. And I guess maybe for me, that is how or what I enjoyed in performance or in arts, is how when something is feeling very connected and bringing a lot of things in together. So I guess it's something I try to create in my performance.
Alice, I think that's a beautiful explication of the processes of performing for you. And I'm so interested in your history when you mentioned that you had no prior training and you developed your capacities as an improviser, as a performer from scratch and found your way over time, because many other people come to it because they've had a background of training in dance or vocal work or theatre, and they spend a lot of time trying to, I suppose, liberate themselves from their training in order to become more freely available to the improvisational processes and forms. You've come from that other direction of found your way, but still you talk about habitual patterns and the need to sort of meet them and free ourselves from them. So I think thank you for talking about that. It's something that not a lot of people talk about in detail. So thank you for sharing that. I've noticed that you've got such a wide range of collaborations you've been involved in and of types of projects. I'd love to know a little bit more about that, about the current collaborations and projects, and what brings you alive now, and what entices you towards other things in the future.
I guess it's a big question. Like I'm a freelancer, so sometimes it's sort of seeing what things come and taking them. I guess a lot of artists does that. So yeah, probably in the future, near future, in 2 weeks, I'm going to Japan for Impro Festival, which I haven't gone overseas for a festival for a while. I'm going to Kanazawa, which is also a region, a sort of small region, and run by another senior vocal artist, male vocal artist. So Kanazawa International Experimental Music Festival. So also very small scale, probably about, not sure, 15 to 20 performers, and then people get paired in between, which often happens in an experimental music festival. So so during the 3-day, I perform every night with different performers. So meeting them for the first time and then playing together on stage. So that's it's quite exciting. And I guess the last while also really try to connect with Asian scene. So through people traveling to Taiwan or me sort of having opportunity to tour to like Japan, Korea, Singapore, so connected to different scenes where it's sort of Malaysian artists also came to Taiwan quite a bit. So that for me also, in a way, it broadened the context of being an Asian artist, broadened the context of what it is to be in this culture, in this region of Western educated, modern, contemporary performer. What is it in each culture's roots that we can sort of try to keep or have or find, where, for sure it's a very conflicted generations, because we're so Western influenced and educated as well in terms of art education. And yeah, I guess in a way, my training still sort of situate more in for me anyway, in art thinking rather than music. Although people who's gone through media art has sort of two different style thinking. So I often think about conceptual project. I often think about more conceptual driven way of working. So my recent album that I sent you guys, it's sort of something I cooked up for a very long time and haven't had the opportunity to execute until a couple of years ago. So it's based on Alice in Wonderland, and really sort of gone through the novel again and rewrote every chapter's text into a poetry score. But really looking into Alice as sort of modern psychological different psychological what would you call it? I guess not exactly illnesses, but symptoms. So really looking into Alice as, yeah, kind of looking at her disassociation, her illusions, her hallucinations, her constant self-doubts and her constant self-criticism, her transforming and situating in such a crazy world, like we all are, and constantly have to shift and change herself mentally, and actually also her form also change. And so it's probably one of the more self-driven big project where it's not sort of invited by other people, collaborated. Yeah, and so that's sort of coming from also another stream of my work where I sort of look at what is difficult to be described. So for me, I don't use language in performance, and it's often coming back to something that is difficult to describe in language. So we can go back to a more common language for me, perhaps going back to a common human language that can connect all humans or cross species even. And yeah, so sort of going back to how also throughout my childhood, I had hallucinations, and I had a sound that accompanied me through 8 to 20 years old. And that sound disappeared when I started performing. So it sort of transformed me as well. So when I used to hear the voice, I sort of felt my body shrink into really, really small, and it felt like Alice in Wonderland, where she really was able to kind of feel her, well, she was shrinking or expanding in different ways, depending on the situation, out of out of interaction, or not by her own priorities. Yeah, so for me, some of those I've done project where I also interview a group of people who had hallucination, with collaboration with a mental institute, and also I work with senior people quite a bit, where I'm interested in exploring death and the topic of death and thinking about imagining the experience of death, but also what happens after. And work with quite a few elder ladies, did a sort of a bunch of interview and exploration work where they think about the moment of dying and what is their own afterlife and rebirth. And each of them had completely different rebirth, and it was really beautiful to discuss with them. Yeah, and recent exhibition, I work with a group of moms who are in international marriage and with young child, where they talk about being sort of split in terms of culture, in terms of language, in terms of a very suspended future, in terms of the children sort of being also sometimes very complex and confused, but kind of looking at my own family, my own child, and looking at how we discuss something that is really difficult to describe there's not even one emotions, there's always such complexity in it, and how those can sort of maybe then be translated into sound work, but also put out in the world in terms of like how the Alice album was recorded in the city. So it's sort of the environment always connect with the voice work.
Wow, thank you. Such a broad range of fascinating works. My ears picked up when you were talking about the indigenous peoples of Taiwan, realizing I know nothing about those. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that, how that might have influenced Taiwan and you.
When I was growing up, there's 9 tribes, but now it's 16. Yeah, so there's 16 different tribes across Taiwan, where a lot of them has been pushed into the mountains or in more kind of remote areas. And there's of course there's the bigger tribes and the smaller tribes, but then also it is a very endangered culture for most tribes. Is also because there's lots of intermarriage, lots of mixed tribe also marriage, as well as with Han people, Chinese Han people. So the language, of course, is all mostly disappearing more through generations, and then also the rituals. So for me, it's sort of a personal interest, really sort of interested and really enjoy the music. So going into some of the festivals and following their rituals, where a lot of them would have a big festival ritual where they open to the public as tourist events, so people could join in some of the rituals. For example, one of the ritual I went to, it's from Saisha tribe, where they danced for 3 nights from sunset to sunrise, to get rid of the bad spirit, which they call the small black people. So apparently in an ancestral kind of legend, the tribe did something bad to the small black people in the forest, and so those people punished them, and they had no harvest for a very long time, and they had to sacrifice something to get the harvest back. So then they started ritual. This is a vague story, I remember. And so the tourists get to join the last night and dance with them, and they do sort of a huge spiral dance where they everyone held hand together in a big spiral, maybe like hundreds of people, and they would spiral in, and then spiral out again from the outside. And this goes for 12 hours. So different people would come and go all nights, from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And some of them have an instrument on their back. It's like a backpack all made of beads and shells. And as they move their body backwards and forward, all the shell sort of on the bottom of the backpack and hitting the bottom of their back. And so it creates this beautiful wave shell sound and metal and coins, I think. And yeah, a lot of the costumes or a lot of the tribe goods are also disappearing. So yeah, it's a transitional time. I think it's very precious for many culture in the world. I mean, I don't really speak Taiwanese very well in my own mother tongue. I can listen, but I can't like say something more complicated than everyday conversations. So all the dialects and mother tongues are also disappearing in Chinese culture. And like Taiwan's gone through Japanese colonial period before Second World War for 50 years. And so like my grandparents and a lot of people over 80, 90 years old now, they've all gone through Japanese education and speak Japanese. So some of that those culture, which is a different kind of culture, and attitude of life are also shifting and changing. So every generation is a huge gap in Taiwan, and it's big change as well. And of course, there was Dutch before the Japanese for 38 years, and then there's different dynasty, Ming and Qing, and then the different kind of government at the moment as well, fighting and changing. So it's always a very changing time, and I think a lot of these cultures are very precious. Witness.
Thank you, Alice, for reflecting on that. Oh, we could talk so much more about that, but I want to maybe draw us back a little bit to performance and your relationship. When you mentioned before or earlier on about listening and that wonderful privileged relationship there is in let's call it sound art with performers and audience, and that opportunity to actually to listen and be present. I'd love to just ask you a little bit more about the relationship with audience and that particular opportunity that exists with generating sounds and with those that are witnessing and listening to stay with and have an appreciation and be present to each other. Performers collaborating are present to each other, to their instruments, and they're present with those that are witnessing and with the audience. It seems like presence is really central to sound practices like this. Could you comment a little bit further about how that is for you and how you perceive that as a performer and when you are performing?
Yeah, I mean, talk about things that is difficult to describe in language. Presence, energy, yeah, I mean, it's such limited words, isn't it? It's sort of way more than this. So I've so the last couple years I've gone back to Melbourne and performed with my daughter, who's 6 years old, and the first year 5-year-old. And the first year she got really stage fright, and I think there was an energy in the room where there was suddenly an expectation, but there's also a chaos. It's a very special festival for a lot of performers with disability and lots of children. And also lots of very mixed style people, which I think probably way broader than what she's experiencing in Taiwan before that. So I think for me, what's quite precious is that little moment before the performance where I guess, like Neil was talking about food, you can smell something that's been cooking, and you can smell the food, but you haven't tasted anything. And that smell for everyone brings all kind of memories or all kind of expectations or all kind of physical reactions. And so for sure, all of this mix of each individual in the room creates such a complex palette. And so I jumped to after my daughter performed the first year. I feel like she was on drug. She was high. She was like, she didn't want to stop after finally being forced on stage. She didn't want to stop after 20 minutes. I was like, stop. And she's like, no more. And so after 30 minutes, I kept like prompting her to finish. And then she did finish. And then she was just really, really excited. Like the whole night, she was talking nonstop. She was very like adrenaline or a mixed chemicals. And I guess like her brain is like, exploded also with this, like, I think there's a certain privilege being performer where we are taking things from the audience. And these things are, I don't know, energies, projections, emotions, or of course the audience are taking things from the performer as well. But it's more of a less to a mass, and the mass giving it to lesser few. So yeah, I like to use her as a very direct example. I think it's a very sort of raw and straightforward expression of what happens on stage, where we do get very stimulated, very very high stress sometimes as well. But different people deal with it differently, and I do enjoy that situation where I really like, if I need to record something on my own with a little recorder, I don't do very well because I'm like, well, there's nothing here to respond to. It's like, whoa. So yeah, like, so for my solo project, I had to go out in the city, in the public space, to record myself. So there's more to improvise with. There's more to respond to. I guess I'm a responder.
I can respond to that. We're running out of time. Thank you so much for your words, your ideas, your thoughts, your musings, contemplations. It's been a real pleasure, Alice. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Alice, for taking the time and for offering the detail of what you have and for bringing us into your life in Taiwan and into your life as a performer and a little bit into your daughter's life as a performer. So thank you so much for the opportunity and wish you the best.
Thank you. Thank you both for the invitation. It's been really great chats.
Great. Thank you.